The hum of the server room was the only sound that dared to breathe in Kwon Jinwoo's penthouse office. It was a sterile, constant whisper against the floor-to-ceiling armored glass that framed the Los Angeles skyline. For Imani, it was the sound of control. Her control. She managed the flow of information in and out of this silent kingdom with the precision of a surgeon, her fingers flying across 3 keyboards, rerouting a data transfer that had been flagged as hostile. It was her world, a landscape of encryption keys, secure lines, and the quiet, lethal business of the man who ruled a significant portion of the city's underworld from this very suite. She was 22, and her official title was private secretary. It was a laughably inadequate description for what she did. She was his firewall, his scheduler, his archivist, and the only person who could meet his gaze without flinching. The door to his inner office hissed open. She didn't look up, her focus locked on the cascading lines of code. She felt his presence before she saw him, a sudden drop in the room's temperature, a shift in the very density of the air. He moved like the world owed him space, and it always paid its debt. "Report," he said. His voice was low, a velvet rasp that held no warmth, only absolute authority. The breach was an amateur, traced back to a shell corporation in Panama tied to the Kuznetsov syndicate. "I've sandboxed the intrusion, scrubbed the affected server, and initiated a counter-protocol that should give their tech division a migraine for the next month," she replied, her eyes still on the screen. "Your 4 o'clock with the Port Authority liaison is confirmed. I've already vetted the restaurant staff and floor plan. Your car is scheduled for 3:30. A beat of silence. That was his version of applause.
Imani.
That was when she finally looked up. Kwon Jinwoo stood by her desk, a figure carved from shadow and steel. He wore a Tom Ford suit the color of a midnight sky, the fabric clinging perfectly to his broad shoulders. His black hair was expertly cut, not a single strand out of place. His face was a masterpiece of cold geometry, all sharp angles and unforgiving planes, except for a thin, silver scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a relic of a past he never spoke of. His eyes, dark and depthless, were fixed on her. "Cancel my afternoon," he said. She blinked. He never canceled. "Sir? We have a more pressing matter." He gestured toward his office. "Bring a notepad." Imani's professionalism was a shield, thick and polished over the 2 years she had worked for him. But as she followed him into the cavernous space, a flicker of uncertainty pierced it. His office was a monument to minimalist power. A single black desk, a wall of glass, and 2 leather chairs. Nothing personal, nothing wasted. He sat behind the desk, the city lights beginning to glitter behind him like a conquered territory. He steepled his fingers, the cuffs of his white shirt revealing the edge of a Patek Philippe watch. "I require a wife." Imani's pen froze over the clean page of her notepad. Of all the commands she had anticipated, a rival to be neutralized, a territory to be acquired, a betrayal to be punished, this was not on the list. She kept her expression neutral, a mask of calm efficiency. "Understood, sir. Do you have a candidate in mind?" "No," he said, his gaze unwavering. "That is your task. You will find her." The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with the unspoken absurdity of the request. She, Imani, his secretary from South L.A. with a degree in data science and a talent for organization, was to play matchmaker for a mafia boss. "You will compile a list of suitable candidates," he continued, as if discussing a corporate merger. "The criteria are specific. She must come from a family with influence, but not enough to challenge my own. She must be presentable.
Poised.
She must understand the nature of my business, without being a part of it. She will be the mother of my heir, the face of this family to the legitimate world. She must be Korean, and she must be compliant." Each word was a cold, precise stone dropped into the quiet pool of the room. Imani wrote them down, her handwriting a perfect, steady script. Compliant. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. "There is no room for error in this, Imani.
This is not about romance.
It is about stability."
En alliance.
A queen for the board, he leaned forward slightly. "You have 1 month. For the next 3 weeks, Imani lived and breathed the project. She dove into research with the same relentless focus she applied to tracking his enemies. She leveraged discreet contacts, scoured society pages, and cross-referenced genealogies of Seoul's elite families with connections in the States. She was building a portfolio of potential queens. She narrowed thousands of possibilities down to 7. The 7 swans, she privately called them. They were perfect, flawless. Each was a portrait of polished elegance. There was Park Soo-jin, the daughter of a tech mogul, with a degree from Stanford and a face that had graced the cover of Vogue Korea. Choi Ha-yoon, a classical cellist who performed in concert halls worldwide, her family rooted in old political money. Kim Min-seo, an art curator whose gallery was a front for her father's less savory investments. For others, each as brilliant and beautiful as the last. All of them Korean, all from powerful lineages, all bred for a life of quiet influence and public grace. Imani compiled the dossiers into 7 black leather-bound folders. Each contained photographs, financial records, family histories, and a detailed analysis of their suitability based on Jinwoo's cold criteria. She had done her job. She had done it brilliantly. On the final day of the month, she requested a meeting. She entered his office and laid the 7 folders on the vast expanse of his polished desk, arranged in a perfect fan. "Sir," she said, her voice crisp, "the candidates for your consideration." He was standing by the window, his back to her, looking down at the sprawling city. He didn't turn. "Tell me about them," she began, her voice even and professional, reciting the highlights of each woman's life as if she were delivering a quarterly report. She spoke of their education, their accomplishments, their family ties. She presented them as assets, acquisitions, perfect pieces for his chessboard. When she finished, the silence returned. He still hadn't moved. The setting sun cast his long shadow across the floor, stretching until it almost touched her feet. Finally he turned. His eyes weren't on the 7 perfect files. They were on her. The look in them was intense, an unnerving focus that made the air crackle. "You did excellent work," he said, his voice a low murmur. He walked slowly toward the desk, his gaze never leaving hers. He circled it, coming to stand beside her, so close she could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne, sandalwood and something sharp, like winter air. He didn't touch the folders. He stopped in front of her. "But you made an omission." Imani's heart gave a sudden, hard thud against her ribs. "Sir, I vetted every candidate thoroughly. I assure you, there are no better options." "I disagree," he said softly. He reached out, not for the folders, but for the pen she was still holding. He gently took it from her fingers, his touch sending a jolt of unexpected heat through her hand. He set the pen down on the desk. "You missed one." His eyes held hers, dark and possessive. "You forgot to submit your own file." The world tilted on its axis. The hum of the servers seemed to fade into a distant roar. Her carefully constructed professionalism shattered into 1,000 pieces. He wasn't looking for a wife. He was testing her. And the test, she realized with a dizzying wave of fear, and something else, something she refused to name, was not over. "That's not my place, sir," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a chilling, predatory curve. "From now on, you will define your own place." He finally looked at the 7 folders, his expression one of dismissive contempt. "These are girls playing dress-up. They know nothing of this world. They would break." He looked back at her. "You, Imani, you do not break." He picked up the top folder, the one for Park Soo-jin, the Stanford graduate. He didn't open it. Instead, he instructed, "The annual Black Dahlia Gala is next week. Mississippi Park will be in attendance. You will accompany me. You will observe her. You will tell me if she is suitable." It wasn't a request. It was a command. And it was a trap. He wasn't evaluating Park Soo-jin. He was evaluating Imani. He was forcing her into proximity, dragging her from the shadows of her server room into the glittering, dangerous light of his world. The night of the gala, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and money. Imani wore a simple, elegant black dress, a stark column of silk against her dark skin. She felt like a crow in a flock of peacocks. The room was a swirl of jewels and fake smiles, a hunting ground for the city's elite. Jinwoo moved through it all with a chilling grace, a shark gliding through a shimmering school of fish. Imani stayed a step behind him, her eyes scanning, analyzing, just as she would in his office. Park Soo-jin was exactly as her file described, stunningly beautiful, radiating a quiet confidence. She greeted Jinwoo with a perfectly rehearsed smile and a deferential bow of her head. They spoke for a few minutes, their conversation a polite dance of pleasantries. Imani watched, her stomach twisting into a knot. That was when she saw them. 3 men near the bar, their suits a little too cheap, their posture a little too rigid. They weren't watching the party, they were watching Jinwoo. They were Kuznetsov's men. Her counter-protocol must have done more than cause a migraine. She moved smoothly to Jinwoo's side, her body brushing his. "Sir," she murmured, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "We have uninvited guests. 3 of them by the bar. Eastern European." His posture didn't change by a fraction, but she felt the muscles in his arm tense under the fine wool of his suit. His eyes flickered imperceptibly toward the men. He gave a slight nod. "Stay close." He continued his conversation with Mississippi Park, his voice calm, but Imani could feel the shift in him. The predator beneath the suit was awake. When one of the men started to move toward them, weaving through the crowd, Jinwoo excused himself. He put a hand on the small of Imani's back, a firm, possessive pressure that was both a warning and a claim. He steered her toward a side exit leading to a private garden. "A lovely evening, Mississippi Park," he said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "We must do this again." The moment they were through the doors, the cool night air hitting them, his demeanor changed. The mask of civility dropped, replaced by lethal focus. "The west exit. Now," he commanded. They moved quickly through the manicured garden. The sound of a commotion erupted from the ballroom behind them. A woman screamed. Jinwoo's hand tightened on her back, propelling her forward. As they reached the service alley, a black sedan screeched around the corner, blocking their path. 2 of the men from the bar jumped out, weapons drawn. Without a word, Jinwoo pushed Imani behind him, shielding her with his body. The alley was narrow, a canyon of brick and dumpsters. He was unarmed, at least visibly. The air was suddenly tight, electric with violence. "Mr. Kwon," the first man said, his accent thick. "Victor sends his regards. He was not pleased with your network interference." Jinwoo was utterly still. "Tell your boss if he wants to send a message, he should have the courage to deliver it himself." The man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. He raised his gun. And in that split second, everything happened at once. Jinwoo moved with a speed that was inhuman. He seized Imani's arm, spinning her into the shallow alcove of a doorway, pressing her back against the cold steel. His body was a hard wall in front of her. She heard a sickening crack, a grunt of pain, and then the deafening report of a gunshot that wasn't aimed at them. Another man appeared from the shadows at the far end of the alley. One of Jinwoo's. Mr. Choi, his perpetually grim-faced head of security. The 2 assailants dropped. The third, the driver, slammed the car into reverse and disappeared. It was over in less than 10 seconds. The silence that fell was more shocking than the noise. Jinwoo didn't move for a long moment, his body still pressed against hers, his breath warm against her ear. She could feel the frantic beat of her own heart, the solid, steady rhythm of his. The scent of sandalwood and gunpowder filled the small space. He finally stepped back, his face unreadable in the dim light. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers for what? Fear? He would find it. But he would find something else, too. A cold, clear resolve. They rode back to the penthouse in a different car, a silent, armored beast driven by Mr. Choi. The silence was absolute. Imani stared out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of neon. She could still feel the phantom pressure of his body shielding hers, the memory of it burned into her skin. Back in his office, the quiet felt different. Fragile. Jinwoo walked to the bar and poured 2 glasses of whiskey, the clink of the decanter unnaturally loud. He handed one to her. Her fingers were trembling slightly as she took it. He stood by the window, looking out, much as he had before. She would have screamed, he said, his voice flat. Imani knew who he was talking about. Not Mississippi Park. Someone else. Monsieur, he said, the name spoken into the glass. My fiancé. 5 years ago. They came for me. She was with me. She panicked. She ran into the street. He took a slow drink of his whiskey. She never understood the danger. I thought I could protect her from it. I was wrong. A man in my position cannot afford to protect a woman who does not understand the world she is living in. There it was. The wound. The ghost that dictated his impossible criteria for a wife. He wasn't looking for a queen. He was looking for a survivor. He was looking for someone who wouldn't break. Someone who wouldn't run. You didn't scream, he noted, turning to face her. I'm your employee, sir, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Panicking is not in my job description. He closed the distance between them in 2 silent strides. He took the glass from her hand and set it aside. He raised a hand and gently brushed his thumb over her cheekbone. His touch was a paradox, exquisitely gentle yet backed by the strength of a man who could break bones as easily as he breathed. Imani, he said, and her name was different now. It wasn't a command. It was a confession. You could have left this job 100 times. After tonight, any sane person would run. I'm still here, she whispered.
It was a choice.
A deliberate one. In that moment, she knew she wasn't staying for the salary or the challenge. She was staying for the man who hid his pain behind an empire of steel and shadow. The next few weeks were a blur of calculated moves. Jinwoo dismantled Viktor Kuznetsov's operation with surgical precision, but the Russian was a cornered rat, and cornered rats are dangerous. The threat escalated. Instead of direct assaults, Viktor started a campaign of whispers. He leaked information, details of shipping manifests, encrypted transaction logs that was designed to look like it came from an internal source. And the leak pointed directly at Imani. Mr. Choi, whose loyalty to Jinwoo was absolute, began to watch her with open suspicion. The air in the penthouse grew thick with mistrust. Imani knew she was being framed, and she knew that in their world, accusations were as good as a death sentence. Jinwoo called a meeting. It wasn't in his office, but in a sterile, windowless room in the sub-basement. Him, Mr. Choi, and 2 other senior enforcers. And her. She was seated at the long steel table, a single file placed in front of her. Her own employee file. It felt like an inquisition. The leaks are traceable to a terminal that only you have access to, outside of myself, Mr. Choi said, his voice flat and accusatory. The timing coincides with your work on the Bride project. Imani met his gaze. Her fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but she pushed it down. Showing weakness now would be fatal. She thought back, replaying every moment, every transaction. She had been careful, meticulous. The leak couldn't be digital, which meant it had to be physical. The gala, she said, her voice clear and steady. At the ballroom. Do you remember the waiter who bumped into me near the bar? He spilled a drink. I handed him my clutch while I cleaned my dress. Mr. Choi frowned. Insignificant. No, Imani insisted, leaning forward. My clutch has a biometric lock. But the outer pocket, where I keep my key card for the building, is a simple magnetic clasp. He would have only needed a second with a cloner. He wasn't a waiter. He was one of Victor's men. You weren't looking for a digital ghost. You were looking for a physical key. You've been sweeping the network, but have you swept the staff elevator logs for unauthorized access after hours? Silence. Jinwoo, who had been watching her without a word, gave Mr. Choi a sharp, commanding look. Choi pulled out a tablet, and his fingers flew across the screen. A few tense moments passed. His expression tightened. There are 3 entries, Choi admitted, his voice tight with grudging respect. Late night. Using a cloned key card. Timestamps matched the data breaches. Imani had done more than defend herself. She had shown them where their own fortress was weak. She had crossed a line from secretary to strategist, and there was no going back. Victor, enraged at being exposed, retaliated with brute force. The ambush came a week later. They were in an underground parking garage when two SUVs boxed them in. The world erupted in a storm of gunfire and shattering concrete. Mr. Choi and his men returned fire, but they were outgunned. Jinwoo threw open his door, pulling Imani out with him. He shoved her behind the solid pillar of a concrete support beam. "Stay down," he roared over the cacophony. He moved through the firefight like it was a brutal dance he had known his whole life. His movements were economical, precise, and utterly lethal. Imani, crouched behind the pillar, watched in a mixture of terror and awe. She saw one of Victor's men get a clear shot. She saw the muzzle flash. She saw Jinwoo's shoulder jerk back, a dark stain blossoming on his white shirt. For one heart-stopping second, she thought he was going to fall. The world narrowed to that single image. Him, vulnerable mortal. The fear that seized her was primal, a ferocious, protective rage. Before she could even think, she acted. She grabbed the heavy fire extinguisher mounted on the pillar, pulled the pin, and aimed it at the two men advancing on their position. She squeezed the handle. A massive cloud of white chemical foam erupted from the nozzle, blinding them. They sputtered, disoriented, just long enough for Mr. Choi to take them down. The remaining assailants fled. The silence that descended was filled with the hiss of the extinguisher and the smell of cordite. Jinwoo walked back to her, his left arm held stiffly at his side. He ignored the wound. His eyes were locked on her, burning with an intensity that stripped her bare. They didn't go back to the penthouse. Mr. Choi drove them to a discreet safe house, a luxury condo in a building Jinwoo owned under a shell corporation. The place was sterile and impersonal, but it was secure. Alone with him, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving a shaky, raw tension in its place. He stood by the window, the city lights a distant, cold fire. The dark stain on his shirt had spread. "You should have stayed hidden," he said, his voice rough. "You would be dead," she countered, her voice trembling slightly. He turned to face her. "You should have run. The day I gave you that ridiculous task. The night of the gala. You should have run and never looked back." "And what would you have done?" she challenged, her voice growing stronger. "Let Victor's men walk all over you? Let your own security team think I was a traitor?" He stalked toward her until he was standing directly in front of her, forcing her to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "The search for a bride," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "It was a test. For you." Her breath hitched. "A test? To see if you understood. To see if you had what it takes to stand beside me. Not behind me. Beside me." His eyes were black holes, pulling her in. "I have my answer." "And what did you find?" she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. He reached up, his uninjured hand cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her skin. "I found that I am a selfish man, Imani. A possessive bastard. Because I have no intention of ever letting you go." It wasn't a declaration of love. It was a statement of fact. A claim. And as his head descended and his lips met hers, she didn't resist. She didn't run. She met his kiss with a fire of her own, a silent answer that sealed her fate. The final move wasn't Jinwoo's or Victor's. It was hers. Jinwoo was planning a full-scale assault on Victor's headquarters, a bloody war to end the conflict for good. It was honorable in his world. It was also suicidal. "You'll lose too many men," she told him late one night in the safe house, spreading a blueprint of Victor's warehouse district across the coffee table. "He's expecting a frontal assault. He wants it. He wants to go down in a blaze of glory and take you with him. It is the only way to cut the head off the snake," Jinwoo countered, his jaw tight. "No," Imani said, her finger tapping a location on the map. "You don't cut the head off. You poison the body. Victor's power isn't his men. It's his reputation with the other syndicates. He's propped up by the triads and the Bratva. Take that away, and his soldiers will abandon him." For the next 2 days she worked. She used her skills not for defense, but for attack. She crafted a digital campaign of misinformation, planting fabricated evidence of Victor skimming from his allies, selling them out to federal informants. She created untraceable communications that showed him mocking their leaders. She didn't start a war with bullets, she started one with bites and whispers. It worked faster than she could have imagined. Victor's alliances crumbled. His funding dried up. His own men grew suspicious. When Jinwoo's forces finally moved, it wasn't an assault. It was a cleanup. Victor was found not in a blaze of glory, but alone, cornered in his own office by his former lieutenants, who handed him over to Jinwoo without a single shot fired. In the aftermath, they stood once more in the penthouse office. The city outside was quiet, unaware of the war that had been won in its shadows. On the polished desk sat the 7 black folders, untouched since the day she'd presented them. Jinwoo walked to the desk. He picked up the stack of dossiers, the curated lives of the 7 swans. He didn't open them. He walked to the sleek, modern fireplace and, with a flick of a switch, brought a line of blue flame to life. He dropped the folders into the fire. They watched as the pictures and pedigrees curled into black ash, the perfect candidates turning to smoke and disappearing. "There is only one candidate," Jinwoo said, his voice soft in the quiet room. He turned to face her, the firelight dancing in his dark eyes. There was only ever one. He was finally acknowledging it. Her place. Not as an employee, not as a convenience, but as his equal, his queen. The cost of that position was her old life, the simple, ordinary world she had left behind. She could never go back. She had seen too much, done too much. She was a part of this world now, her hands stained with its ink. He said nothing more. He didn't need to. He walked to the massive wall of glass, the city sprawling beneath them, a glittering, endless kingdom of light and shadow. He held out his hand. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. Imani walked toward him, her steps sure and steady. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, a firm, possessive grip that promised both danger and sanctuary. Together, they looked out at the empire he ruled. An empire that was now, in a way she was only just beginning to understand, hers as well. The choice had been made. The world had been claimed. And in the silent, shared ownership of the night, she knew she was finally home.